I want to welcome everyone to our first workshop of the quarter from the Office of Research and our third qualitative forum of the year, which is great. And today we're going to be talking about qualitative research during the pandemic and what challenges and opportunities you found when you pivoted quickly during COVID. So that'll be the main discussion point for today. And I want to thank Ricky for running this again for us. I really appreciate that. And I know all of you appreciate it. And thank you for coming. So before we get started, I would like to read the land acknowledgement. And normally I read a whole land acknowledgement, and I would just like everyone at this point, because I've heard from some people that the land acknowledgements are not really getting to what we'd like them to do. So I would like everyone to take a minute and remember and think about the fact that the land on which our campus sits was land occupied by the tribes of the Coast Salish people for thousands of years before we were here. And I would just like to take a quiet moment for everyone to think about that and what that means, and particularly this Earth Week, to basically thank the Earth as well as the peoples that were here before us for these resources that we now enjoy. And it is part of our job to be stewards of this land. So I'd like everyone just to think about that for just a couple seconds, and then we'll start our meeting. So thank you. Really appreciate that. So without further ado, now that Ricky has us running, and we see two Rickies in the room, I'll just hand it over to you, Ricky, and I'll be on here for a little while, and then I'm actually in between two meetings, so I'm going to pop off after about 10-15 minutes or so, and just let you take it from here, Ricky, okay?
All right, thanks. You guys can hear me okay? All right, great. We have like multiple microphones going and stuff, so I basically got on my laptop, which is why you see me, and I need to be able to admit people in the Zoom. So if anybody sees somebody showing up that needs to be let in, feel free to let me know if I don't see it. I actually had the Google Doc posted on the other computer, and now I'm trying to sign in to pick it up, but for note taking, I just wanted to first go around the room, see who's here, say hello, let us know what kind of research you tend to do as a start. And then our goal today is to really talk about how has the pandemic influenced your research agenda? What were some of your challenges? What are some of the strategies that you've taken, and really just kind of have a conversation? And it looks like we have a pretty small group here today. So I suspect we will not have a problem getting out of here on time, which we struggled with last time when we had so many people in the room. I'm Ricky Thompson. I do critical discourse analysis, and I've been integrating ethnographic methods to my research lately. I tend to look at language and social media, online dating, and that's kind of my deal. I'm in IAS, and I'm in writing studies. Looks like everybody that's here probably already knows each other, but I'll let everybody say hello. I'll go ahead and pick you based on the participant list I have, and so you can say hello. Cheryl's already said hello. Then I see Emma is here, and Margaret, and then Sushil on my list. So I'll start with you, Emma, first.
Okay, great. Is there anyone in the room?
Nobody is here physically. It is just me.
Okay. Yeah. All right, great. Hi, everyone. I know you all. I'm in writing studies and IAS, and yeah, my research tends to be primarily qualitative. I do a little bit of quantitative, but mostly qualitative. And I look at technologies and how they're designed, and who is doing the designing, and how we might improve teaching how to do design. So those are kind of my areas of research, and yeah, nice, happy to be here.
Next is Margaret, then Sushil, then I see Barb has also joined us. Barb, hello, we're saying hello and who we are and what we do as a starting. Margaret, on to you.
Well, as Ricky said, I'm Margaret Lundberg, and I work in the Teaching and Learning Center. And my research is also, well, it's not even primarily qualitative, it is completely qualitative. I work mostly in autoethnographic inquiry, looking at identity construction in narrative.
Okay,
And-
I'm Sushil Oswal. My research is both qualitative and quantitative, and right now I'm doing both. I came because you were going to talk about something about, I think, interview analysis or something I read. So I came to see what people were using for that, because I'm conducting a whole bunch of interviews right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushil. Barb, looks like you're up next, and then we'll move to our topic, and I'll share screen after you say hello.
Okay, hi, I'm Barb Taves. I'm in the criminal justice area, and I am probably, I'd say 98% qualitative with a little bit of quantitative with a survey that we do, but there's pictures in the survey, so it has a qualitative feel to it. And I focus on kind of the connection between trauma healing, and restorative justice, and architecture and design of justice spaces. And right now, particularly focused on trauma-informed design, and working with a number of qualities to create a nice typology as well as application into the real world. So yeah, work with architects a lot.
Great, thanks. Great to see everybody here. As pointed out, nobody is in the room with me, so I have moved to a little chair. We are recording this though, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the link to the Google Doc in the chat for if you would like to take notes or see the notes. I'm just going to kind of take notes as needed. This is a very organic process, as many of you are used to probably working with me. I'm thinking Cheryl and I've taught together, so good laugh. So, all right, I've shared the screen, and I basically just have kind of our guiding question for today. How has the pandemic affected your research, and kind of what strategies have you taken or have you used, kind of thing? And if there's other questions people want to add, feel free, please jump in. I'm just kind of making this up as we go, so to speak. And anybody want to jump in first? I almost want to call out Emma, since Emma was the one who threw out the topic, but I don't have to. I don't necessarily want to go first. Does anybody want to start?
With how the pandemic impacted our research?
Yeah.
I mean, I can start. I was supposed to do a full-on in-person East Coast-based design workshop data collection process for a prosecutor's office and that sort of thing. And we couldn't do that at all. So we moved online, and as much as I would have preferred to be in person, it actually led to the creation of some really creative data collection processes virtually that I think is actually going to mean I can expand my reach of where I can do research and how I can do research, that, which means I don't necessarily need money to travel all the time, and I can still do engagement. But the survey that I mentioned was created because we couldn't go to the East Coast, but we wanted to collect that same kind of data. And it's now turning into something that, we're getting the QR code. There's a major conference this summer. We're going to distribute in the conference materials and that sort of thing. And it's going to increase our data collection. And we never would have done it if it hadn't been for the pandemic. We created a design lab process for using Zoom and a collaborative whiteboard that in still having people design spaces and that sort of thing. And, in person, yeah, would have been better. But we still came out with amazing designs and have gotten amazing kind of learnings coming out of it. another project that I was working on, well, and still working on, I'm in analysis mode on it right now. I use some of the tools that we created in that particular project in this new project that I'm doing. But it became more evident what I was missing. It's an existing survivor space in Winnipeg in Canada. And, you know, my hope was that I would be able to walk through the space with survivors and have them tell me stories of the space by being in it and that sort of thing. But because of COVID restrictions up there, couldn't do it even with masking or anything like that. And so I feel like I have missed a little bit of data, you know, because of not being able to be in person with that one. But overall, like, I actually am pretty impressed with the creativity the pandemic sparked and how kind of my data collection tools now, I feel like I have that many more tools, and to a point where I almost feel bad that I know some people's research really stopped and ended and had trouble because of the pandemic. And I'll say I would prefer to do it in person, but just feel like it opened a whole bunch of opportunities to be more creative in my approach.
Sushil, I see your hand.
Yeah, if I could ask, is this Barb who was talking? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, how are you using the whiteboard and which one? If you could share a little bit more with that, because I'm interested. I actually have a workshop I'll be teaching in June at a conference, and I might use some of your tricks or strategies.
Sure. Yeah, we used Miro.
Yes.
It had a lot of great Miro, M-I-R-O.
Actually my workshop is on Miro.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Okay.
So our design labs kind of had three parts to them. The first part is people kind of like talking about how they want to feel when they come into spaces for difficult and emotional conversations. And we would use the Post-it note function where we would still have conversation in our Zoom space, but we had one of our research team creating Post-it notes that just slowly capture, like just in real simple form, capture what people said. So we'd have a collection of Post-it notes, and I should say we're recording the whole time. And then we would have them react to the existing design of the space that was under study. And in Miro, we would put the photographs of that space that we would get from the hosts that we would put up there. And again, using Post-its, would write down kind of keywords of how people were responding to it. And so we could always kind of go back and talk about it and that sort of thing. When they did design work, there would be a template of a room layout. You know, the architects would make it to scale and everything like that for the space we were looking at. And then below that blank room layout would be a collection of images based on kind of things we wanted to encourage them to think about putting into the space. So there would be a section of images that were nature oriented, a selection of images that were about furniture, architectural representations of windows and doors, a color palette just through colored circles, and kind of all these different sorts of things that were there. And we would give them a prompt, you know, imagining you're entering this space, what's the first thing you want to see? And then just kind of keep them going. And as they would talk, the architect facilitator would take some of the images from below, make sure they're accurate to what the person was saying, and actually move them into the room layout. And the nice thing too is because we were digital, if there wasn't an image represented in what was provided to them, the architectural facilitator could do a Google search. And I think that's embedded right in Miro, and get an image so that the person could actually say, yeah, I want that one, the top left corner, and drop that in. And so then we would capture their design at the end as an image and export it out. And then analyze all the different things that they had in their images for features and that sort of thing. And it really, we thought people would kind of zoom out in the virtual environment, but we would use the breakout feature as well. So, you know, if we had 15 people in a lab, we would have anywhere 3 to 5 breakout groups, and each breakout group would have their own section of the Miro board to be doing their design work and that sort of thing.
Just pulled
Thank
up.
you.
I hadn't heard of, thank you. Sorry, Sushil.
You should check it out. You'll really like it. And I'm doing it, of course, to critique it. It has accessibility problems. And but one more question, quick one. So you are already you touched on, you know, you might be bringing in third-party tools to the whiteboard, to Miro. Are there any other tools that you have liked? And also when your participants are doing analysis, how do you record those analyses besides the verbal, you know, recording?
Well, we would do analysis, both of the visual image and the verbal recording, so that we could kind of match up what they were saying about, you know, why they wanted that thing in their space, you know, what feelings it elicited, impacts, all that sort of stuff. So we would kind of code them separately and then side by side. What was your first question? Oh, other tools.
You know,
We
they have a
really-
whole bunch of them on their, you know, on their board. Are there any that you have experimented with?
You know, not really. Like, we use some of the technical things that are on there, the arrows, you know, to make maps and things like that. We actually also use it in our analysis, that we would, you know, what made it nice to have all those different Post-it notes of keywords. It made it easy to group Post-it notes in the analysis. And then, you know, when we'd go back to the recording that related to those Post-it notes, seeing kind of how they spoke to each other. Did we get it right? Were there different ways once we had that in there? You know, we would use some of those technical design tools that were in there, but I would say my use of it is limited to what the architectural firm that I was working with, the degree that they used it. So that would be the extent of it. With the survey that we created, we were always kind of going back and forth between Google Forms and Typeform. And we ended up using Typeform because it was just easier to embed images in it. There were some things that we didn't like about it that Google Forms was better, but decided what we could get out of Typeform was better than its limitations.
Great. I see Cheryl has her hand up too.
Yeah, I just have a, you know, a crazy question. Have you ever thought about teaming up with sort of gamers that create these 3D environments that you could walk through and actually put people in the room and change things in the room in a 3D way that might be more experiential remotely?
Yeah, you know, the architecture firm that I work with some of their in-person things, especially with youth, they have been using some virtual reality kind of things.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in on that one. I just went to a conference last week that was using Gather, which is like a virtual space like you're talking about. And I heard that Jenny Quinn might be using the same tool in her teaching. And it is those spaces where, and so you can sign up, or they were calling it Gather Town, but the link is Gather. And when you go to it, there's like different rooms that you can go into. And so they'd set up like, you know, like the keynotes were happening in this particular room and you could go in, you could go, there'd be like a Google Doc that would be like the announcement board. If you went to the announcement board, you could see whatever was on the doc. If somebody was presenting their little, you had to make a little avatar and your little avatar would, you know, sit on the circle at the front of the room. And if you went and sat in one of the chairs, you could actually talk to people who were within 3 chairs of you, either direction, and hear people, but the speaker couldn't hear you. And if you wanted to ask questions, you had to go like up to the microphone and ask a question. And so that would like your voice would become spotlighted and take over the room. They even had it set up where they had little like tables that were next to like you had people sitting, it was almost like little chairs that were like an audience to the stage. And then there were tables to the side that had about 4 chairs. And you could go to the table with another colleague and chat with them, like while you were listening to the talk and talking to each other. And so I was immediately thinking, oh my God, I could imagine, rather than having students go into breakout rooms, if you set up a virtual classroom in that way, where you say, okay, go to your tables and go work together, because the people's avatars could only hear the people who were within a vicinity. So I don't know if this is kind of what you're talking about, but I left very inspired to think about how I might use this in my classroom. Of course, my next question, of course, does it have accessibility issues? And I don't,
Yeah.
Sushil, have you heard of this or not?
Yeah, that's probably an issue, right? Accessible. But I actually went to a conference that was like that in the fall, Ricky, where you walked around just like a conference, and you could sit and talk to people, or you could go to rooms and hear different talks, and you could walk up to the board and
Mhm.
see what was going on. It was, it's like being in a game, right?
Do you remember which platform they were using, Cheryl?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
I have no idea. It was an international harmful algae conference. And it's the first one, so it was a science conference and we went virtual, and it's the first time any of us have gone into something like that. And it was really amazing. But I have no idea what platform they were using. But it was quite an experience. Of all the virtual conferences I've been to, that was the most innovative.
Yeah, I mean, people are using those. I also went to one. I'm trying to think which one it was. And it had the same sort of features where you could move closer to people and hear them, or you could hear the chatter from a distance. And they were, it was not fully accessible, but still, I could just literally, this is where I would use the word blindly, very positively, that I could blindly move around and go to different parts of I was in the lobby. So in the lobby, I could move around pretty nicely, though it was not very targeted kind of movement, because I can't see that. I'll email you and I'll ask you the name of the conference so that I can, because at some stage I would like to look at comparatively. In India also, they are developing a new system. I have it written down. I went to a conference last November, and they have their own system which had slightly different features. They all have problems, but they were interesting, very interesting ideas the way you described them.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks, Sushil.
Yeah, anybody finds out more of these platforms, please share them with all of us. You can also just send it to the Qualitative Quorum discussion space, and we can kind of add it to the list. I definitely am very interested in it. And I'm curious how they're going to be dealing with accessibility, right? So that how can you find your way around, like, right, Sushil, how did they just tell you, like, move your mouse and there's no way you would know unless it's giving you some kind of direction, right?
Oh, there are multimodal ways to do such things, and there is technology that's in experimental stage. It's around. It's a matter of these engineers, who are actually working on the architecture, that they get that technology in early on, so that it could be integrated. So there are ways. There are touch screens now that can give that feel for the place, and also embedding sound signals that only you hear them when you want to hear them. Other times you can suppress them. Of course, they need energy, but there are ideas floating around like that, and that's why I'm interested in looking at it.
Very cool. Love to hear about some other people want to share what's going on with their research, some of the challenges that they've had.
Sure, I'll go since I'm the one who kind of suggested this. I'm very curious to hear of how it's going for everyone. I feel like maybe like how others have said, I know Barb has said this too, it feels like that there's some good things and some bad things, right? Like there were definitely some lost opportunities. One of my big projects, or former big projects, which was working on that social robot, like we were going into schools and we were ready to pilot in schools. And obviously when schools got shut down, like that basically all kind of stopped and got shut down. And there were other things going on, but that kind of led me to be like, I think I need to just step off this project because there's just too much uncertainty around it. And yeah, other factors too. So it felt like that was like a walking away from like a research project in some ways, even though we still have data and we're still writing papers. But and my colleague actually pivoted to working on virtual reality instead, which is fantastic, but I'm not interested in virtual, like it's not an area that I feel like I'm interested in, partially because it makes me like motion sick. So I'm kind of like, nope, don't want to spend most of my research life in that domain. But so those are some negative things. But I do think that there were some positive things. And I feel like I pivoted more to focusing a little bit more like on my research agenda in general and focusing on higher ed pedagogy. And so I think one of the good things, both like personally and professionally, was really connecting with my collaborators, because we couldn't see each other, like they're at different institutions and we couldn't meet up like we typically might, like a couple times a year. But instead we now meet, and we were meeting online before, but like a meeting I have like a 2.5 hour, 3 hour meeting with one of my collaborators every week. And sometimes we write and sometimes we analyze data. And I feel like without that big Zoom shift, I don't know if that would have happened. And so in some ways it's made it much more productive. And then on my other project, we were working on 75 interviews, like as a team of us, we're doing 75 qualitative interviews. And we had to pivot mid-pandemic to go from like mostly in person to all on Zoom. And that actually made it so much easier, right? Just to do Zoom interviews instead of in person, just the time and travel and things like that. So I don't know, those are a couple things, like some opportunities, some losses, I still feel like I'm trying to, and also like maybe where I am right now in my trajectory, my career, like just kind of thinking about which research agenda, like how it is shaping the research agenda in some ways. So yeah.
I was going to jump on that one too,
Yeah.
because I had some similar stuff. This is Ricky. I was also in the middle of interviewing people for my online dating research, and definitely everybody was moving to talking on Zoom, which I found a lot easier for me because I was driving to everybody, right? To, meet them at a coffee shop, meet them at home. And I'm sure Margaret's going to be able to talk to this too, because I know she was having some of the similar things going on. But on the one hand, right, it saved me time to not have to be going places. And in some ways, I was actually able to deal with collecting the data better in terms of like sound quality, because I was at home, they were at home, we weren't in a loud coffee shop. I mean, some of my early interviews, some of the data is just too hard to hear because I was interviewing them in a public space that was rather loud. So, I mean, that was good. And then with Zoom, obviously, like Zoom can save the transcript for you, which I thought was nice. But then some of the other things I had to deal with were now the problems of saving data in ways that weren't part of my original IRB application, right? Like if it's on Zoom, is it safe? Can I save it here? Do I have to delete it quickly? I was also using Otter transcription software, and then somebody pointed out, oh, that's cloud-based. Like, is that okay to save for IRB? And so though that wasn't because of the pandemic just started completely changing how I was recording and kind of saving my data across different platforms, and kind of trying to strategize with what was okay and what wasn't. And one of the things I think that became really important for me, and, I checked in with IRB about this, was, if we didn't use their name or any identifiers anywhere in the conversation, and I'd already done the work of kind of pseudonyming everything, then there was nothing connecting them. Like it was okay as long as like we weren't talking about them by name on the recording, right? Like their real name. Like I already like said, we're going to use your pseudonym the whole time, like today, so that everything became maintained in a way that was still protected. And so I guess that was one of my kind of challenges and strategies that really came to mind for me.
This is Sushil. You can also record just locally on Zoom, you know, you can just do local recording on your laptop
Yeah, I was
and
actually,
skip the cloud part altogether.
yeah, I will say, my concern about recording everything locally was how many recordings and how long they were and how much space they were going to start taking. I mean, you can also save them locally and then just save them to the UW drive, right? Which is, you know, that part is also, safe. But for me, my concern about video, having so much video recording, is also just whether or not I had the capacity in my computer. I interviewed over 100 people, and a lot of them are 2-3 hour interviews, multiple interviews. So I was really worried about space when it came to video. And I didn't really want to save the video. I really just wanted to save the transcription, because the video also had the face, which I didn't want to have their face. Right. So I think there became other things, and I wasn't thinking about those initially either, that I had to rethink. But yeah, then it was like, okay, just delete the video and save the transcription, right? And that doesn't take up as much space. So that was another thing. But like the Otter transcription software is a cloud-based software, and that's a voice to text software. So I was using that instead of using, like, I shifted to that from doing an audio recording in the interview, and I hadn't thought about the fact that it was cloud-based for like, I think I probably recorded 60 interviews before it even dawned on me that I hadn't thought about it being cloud-based, right? So then it made me think of everything. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Margaret. As Ricky mentioned, I did the same thing with interviews, and my everything was built around interviews. So when the pandemic started, I had one interview face-to-face, in the can, and everything else had to shift to Zoom. So as Ricky mentioned, yes, it's easier from a standpoint. The people that I interviewed were sort of all over the Puget Sound, trying to get them together so that I could meet with them, individually or as a group, was tricky. I mean, literally setting up the one group interview that I had took us, I don't know how many go rounds until we finally found a time and a place we could all be there. And then 3 people missed it because someone had to go out of town because there was a death in the family and someone else got sick. And I don't even remember what happened to the 3rd person. So trying to set those up on Zoom, as tricky as it could be, was still much easier than face-to-face. What I found interesting, and again, this was my dissertation research, so I'm like a neophyte with this. I was surprised at the changes in the kind of information that I got from the interviews, and that was probably the biggest surprise to me. Even though I really wasn't sure what to expect, the give and take of a face-to-face interview with 8 people in the room is very different than the give and take with everyone sitting in their house somewhere. Especially at the beginning when everyone was trying to get used to Zoom, it was very stilted and strange, and a lot of either interruptions or people not speaking because they didn't want to interrupt. As time went on and we all got a little bit more used to the technology, that seemed to be less of a problem. But the thing that surprised me the most of my interviews were one-on-one over Zoom, is there's this odd comfort level that happens when I am sitting in my house and you are sitting in your house and we're having a conversation about something. There are things that people said to me that I was sort of surprised that they would talk about. There was this level of, for lack of a better word, intimacy to these conversations, because you're not in a coffee shop which is nobody's domain. You're not in someone's house, but not the other ones where one is a guest. Everyone's sort of sitting in their own space. And there were things, I won't say really, really intimate things so much as topics that came up and information that I received that I would never have expected to receive. The other thing that it made me think about, and that's actually the kind of work that I'm working on now, is looking at sort of the emotional labor of being a student. In my case, I look at mature students. And so the emotional labor that's involved in those interactions that became very apparent over Zoom, simply because someone's kids are in the other room and, you know, things are happening around and you're right there. You might as well be sitting in their living room, except you're not. And it was surprising and interesting. And yeah, so just sort of the things that I can't say for sure, because all of my face-to-face interviews were done over Zoom. I didn't have a single, you know, one-on-one interview that didn't, but I've done lots of one-on-one interviews before, face-to-face, all of us together in some place. This just it felt very different. Not necessarily better or worse, just different. And so I think it would be really interesting to, you know, I'm sure it's the sort of thing that somebody somewhere is going to look at someday, the kind of differences that just Zoom, you know, has in interviewing at all, just the differences. Just based on the little bit that I had to do, I'd say it made big differences. Would be interesting to see the kind of effect it has on the data that you gather.
This is Ricky. I'm reminded the most obvious thing about how my research changed based on something you're saying here, Margaret. So I was studying on online dating, right? That's what I was interviewing people about. And the pandemic completely just changed the subject I was studying, right? Like all of a sudden people couldn't go meet for their first date in the coffee shop because everything was closed down. People were afraid to touch each other. They were afraid to, you know, be in each other's space. We were all afraid we were going to die if we catch this kind of thing. So people stopped dating, right? Like they were online dating. At first it was, are they going to stop dating? And then the next question was, or are they actually going to start dating online for the first time instead of just using apps as a matchmaking service? And so what I ended up doing, you know, I already was working on a book project where I had, you know, certain chapters already laid out based on the before times, dating, online dating in the before times. And now I had to actually add a whole, I basically was like, I can't not look at this, right? Like I'm in the middle of this. So then I started my data, my research then became kind of a longitudinal study where next thing I know, like in March, the beginning of the pandemic, I sent something out to all my participants and said, okay, like the world is changing. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to date? Are you not going to date? You know, are you out? And so I started following up. So I've been following up with my participants like every quarter or so. And then just to kind of check in, like, you know, what's going on with dating? Are you willing to date again? Are you not willing to date again? Do you have mask requirements? And so I ended up collecting 2 years worth of data. And like this week, I'm in the middle of doing what I'm calling my wrap up, my pandemic dating final wrap up. And I'm reaching out. I have about 40 participants out of 100 of them that were still out in the world dating, that were like cool with following up. And I'm like scheduling more interviews again, right? And so my project is almost like never stopped, but I don't know what to do. Like this is not going to be a chapter in the book I was already writing. So now I'm dealing with trying to make sure that I do something timely around this project, but not lose the momentum on the original project. So it's like I'm juggling multiple projects to deal with how the whole pandemic just literally changed how people were interacting, right? And which was exciting, but in some ways, my research agenda got busier because of the pandemic. And there was no way, I was just afraid if I didn't even look at it, what would happen if, you know, I write a book my book comes out and like the pandemic has changed everything so much that my book is meaningless, that I wasn't paying attention. So I was so afraid to not keep my finger on the pulse, even though I didn't know what I would do with the data, I guess you could say. And it was also like, you're following the trajectory of something that you don't know where it's going to go, right? It's that whole build the ship as you sail it kind of thing, which I guess I tend to like at times, but it's a little bit unnerving because the lack of control over like what you're planning to do, this whole like committing to what your research question was. Well, my question kept changing through the pandemic, right? And what that also did for me, on a positive, is that I found myself really rethinking methods around this kind of work, where I'm definitely somebody who's promoting like having an organic process around your methodology and being okay with that if you need to, right? And not being like, we must have this question answered in this way, all the same exact, we must interview everybody the exact same way. Like that's just wasn't realistic as the world was changing. And so I think trying to be more reflective about how are we kind of collect data, knowing that things aren't necessarily all the same, but within the spirit of trying to find the answers, right, to particular questions. So, yeah.
To add on to that, this is Emma. To add on to what you're saying, Ricky, I feel like I've maybe taken a different tack, and I don't know if it's really as smart to do so. So like I had 2 big data collection projects during the pandemic, and they started before and ended and went during, and we're not after yet, right? So I have both of these data sets. We have situations where people were in a pandemic and they weren't. And that's not the focus of the study. But now as we're writing things up and like analyzing the data and publishing, we're both like either caveating it, saying like, this doesn't account, like we obviously the pandemic impacted this, but we're not reporting on it. And then we're getting reviewers who are like, well, how did the pandemic? And we're like, well, that wasn't the focus. We do have people talking about like, oh, now I work from home and it's done this way. Or people in the one study, it was about their teaching practices. And they're like, well, this is what I did in before times, but this is what I'm doing now. So, but it's not collected in a systematic way, right? I don't know if anybody else has had that challenge. So it sounds like, Ricky, you paused and you were like, okay, I have to collect data differently now. I'm going to do something longitudinal to look at those changes. And we didn't. We were just one-shotting, but some of the people with, I mean, we can go back to them if we wanted to, but it's just, I'm like, oh, maybe we do need to do a COVID pass of the data. But then I'm also like, it wasn't asked in a systematic way. So I actually don't think it would be very ad hoc to do it. Barb has some brilliance to drop my way, I have a sense. Barb, what are you going to say?
Well, you finished what you were going to say. I was just setting myself up for when you were done.
No, that's kind of it. I'm just petering out of like, yeah, I'm just kind of like, is it worth it to do that? Or just move on and just focus on what we originally planned to focus on?
Well, that reminded me of another study that I had going, which is mixed methods with Lindsay McCunn. Some of you may remember her. Yeah. So we had this project that had been lingering for years and years and years. And all these hiccups along the way. We had funding, all these hiccups. Washington State, IRB was in a women's prison. And then COVID hit, and the correctional system, I mean, that was just a shit show because, staff are overworked, the men and women are, all that. And we got to a point where we were within a few months of losing the money totally to even do the study. And so the superintendent of the prison, we managed to convince them to let us at least collect something all virtually without going into the prison. And she said, okay, you can come in, but you have to qualify everything that you did data collection during COVID, and it's on corrections fatigue. So we know that our results are impacted by COVID because they're extra fatigued, but because we had, we had to do something because we were about to lose the funding. We couldn't kind of like shift gears, and we just wanted some kind of data of some kind. And so it's just anytime we write it up, we have to put the disclaimer in there that this is during COVID. When we actually did our recruitment, we said, we know that you're in a particularly difficult time. blah, 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 blah. And they didn't really talk too much about COVID. In the end, we couldn't even barely get anyone to participate, out of, 25 hoped for interviews, we could get 4 because they were so pissed off and so angry and so tired and so burnt out. Out of 400 staff, I think we have 70 people who completed a survey, all these, we weren't asking. Yeah. It just reminded me of the shit show on that particular project. So that wasn't exciting and fun like the other one.
Yeah, that's all so crazy. Sushil, I'm kind of curious. Did you, I haven't heard yet. How's the pandemic affected you?
Yeah. Before I do that, very quickly, I don't know, you might be already planning to do that, but what Margaret said, for example, about different sort of intimacy in these Zoom meetings with people when they are one-on-one, or what, Barb, you were just now talking about, writing an ethnographic note, which can be published. Some anthropology journals will publish, if not your own field, is a possibility. People do write about such things. You might remember that Berkeley anthropologist whose wife fell off a cliff and died. He was doing research in Philippines with headhunters. He wrote a whole book actually around that, and that's a whole genre of research that's reflexive. And so there might be a possibility, if you're willing to, set aside the main project briefly and take a break and take good notes and then write one of those notes. Now, my project, I think for me, doing certain projects has become easier. Being blind, traveling to places always requires additional help. People either driving you or taking buses in this area, even that is exhausting and time consuming. So that has gotten better. I'll tell you about the one that I'm right now starting, that there are a lot of cases here on the West Coast with these forest fires, where disabled people were affected far more than other people were, because they couldn't move, particularly elderly people. If you are a wheelchair user, or you just have physical movement limitations, and whether you have cancer and age. So they were not. What has happened differently is that these people are using Zoom, which you would not have expected them to use previously, because there was too much of technology. But somehow Zoom has moved into these lives. And so I am gearing up. I have enough participants right now, and IRB came through last week. So I'm going to start these interviews over Zoom with people all across California. There are 2 people here, someone from Canada. British Columbia wants to get on because I said West Coast. As I was working with an anthropologist to recruit people. So that's, both as a blind person researcher, but also looking at how these participants of mine, they have moved into a technology space where I can reach them, where I couldn't have traveled, all the way to Southern California from here. That was just, not within my either pocket or my feet. I couldn't have, it would have cost a lot of money. So that's what I would say. So that's my contribution, is how technology used among some of the groups that you wouldn't imagine, that improved specifically in the area of Zoom.
Yeah, I think you're talking about, right? Also the ability, I'm reminded of connecting to people who are also remote, right? Like,
Yeah.
which is often a really hard thing. Like we often do a lot of our studies where people are in, population centers. But yeah, so the remoteness, the travel funding, I mean, there's all these ways in which there was more access, right? I definitely share this with all of you. I was able to attend a bunch of things in the UK and in Europe, which is where a lot of the discourse analysis stuff is. And so I was able to give talks. I was able to see talks where I usually I feel like I'm completely disconnected from kind of my collegial network where they meet regularly to do these things because it's just an hour drive for them. But it's so all of this, right? The funding to do it and just the ability to go is huge. And I think Sushila, you pointed out and you don't have to deal with being out in the world and all the other obstacles of that, right? Which travel is travel. It's and add an able-bodied world that makes it harder to move about to new places. These are all lots of great stuff. I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing it's 1:25, and I know people may have classes at 1:30 and the like. In our remaining minutes, does anybody want to add anything or ask any questions of anybody or throw any topics out for next year? I'm thinking maybe we have a fall meeting again. I enjoyed the conversation a lot. This was a nice one versus just reporting out on what everybody's doing, which is what I think our first one was.
Yeah, the people who talked in the room here, how would you feel? Like, I want to ask more directly Emma. She might be able to coordinate this process. I'm already coordinating a couple of other projects similar. The things that we talked about, all of us here, that could make an article for something like interactions. That's a publication. It's not a journal, but it has the readership of a journal. And some of the things that are, published there are, small tidbits, but then there can be sometimes serious articles. And this is, reflexive writing that we would do. But all of us, all the people who talked, we had some experience to talk about. What do you think of doing something where we don't have to set up a time for this, really do very limited writing, 300, 400 words each of us, talking about this and sending it to something like interactions?
Yeah, I think that sounds really interesting, Sushila. I'd be happy to start a document and coordinate if people wanted to write up a couple of some just reflections on research as qualitative researchers and how the pandemic feels like all of us have pros and cons in some ways.
And the things we talked about, these could be in those reflections.
Yeah.
What we shared, these things are themselves, an experience. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. So would you like to lead that?
Sure. If people want to be involved, I'd be happy to.
Send me.
I don't know if interactions might be the right venue since their focus is so much on, unless we're going to make it more technology focused, which it might be, but we could still write it up and then sort of look for a place that does. I'm sure there's a variety of the qualitative, there's qualitative notes. There's a couple of other ones that are qualitative in nature that might be interested in it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where it goes. It's more, and if we do technology wise, then we could, really name it after Zoom or, or Google Hangouts or something. Yeah. And if we go for the qualitative research, we will then, more focus on how the experience of conducting research, how that was shaped by technology.
I enjoy reflecting on my work, so I would certainly be interested in something like that.
Cool.
Someone else takes the lead on it.
Yeah. How about you, Ricky? How about you and Margaret?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I was feeling a little guilt in that you suggested Emma lead it because I was like, should I be leading it since I kind of started?
No, Emma knows, like in ACM journals, people do such stuff very, on a whim, like my whim right now, that people do this kind of, work happens. And I mentioned interactions mainly because, that's something I read all the time. But any venue will be fine. We could start and see what it looks like, and then we could take it.
I would be interested. I would totally be, and I think it's a great idea.
I agree.
What about you, Margaret? Are you in?
Oh, yeah, I'm totally in. I mean, my work is reflective. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, I can take the to-do and do some soft leadership on it, but I might need some poking if there's a deadline people want to get it out by. But my process is always to write an abstract, just like a couple hundred words. So I could probably do that and then send that around. And if everybody wants to just pop in 500 words, I'd be happy to kind of lead that. And then
we can also just, also copy and paste some of the notes we just took as kind of a framework to remind ourselves and, just kind of work through that. And that's kind of how I also imagine. Obviously we had some themes that showed up, and I started shifting them to kind of a bullet list with subpoints around, because I was starting to do some thematic analysis, like travel or connection,
of course,
interviewing, publishing,
always analyzing. We're always thematizing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Ricky, would you send me the Google Doc?
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat again here, but I can just share it with you all as well.
Okay, I never got the link in the chat. The only thing I can see is Cheryl's note that she had to go to another meeting.
Oh, you know why?
I have one that started a minute ago and it's in my office, so I need to go.
Yeah, and I have one other suggestion. Ricky, you are recording this. So if you will also share the transcript, that you can download the transcript.
That's
we would share that.
Yeah, I can see why apparently my message is only going to Media Center. I don't know why, because I'm not on the host computer. So yeah, I'll send it to y'all. Yeah, and I'll say.
All right, thank you. This was good.
This was fabulous.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.